New topping L30 is a sibling of a flagship topping A90, and you might be wondering, how does it perform? Well, spoiler alert, this amp performs like a With that out of the way, we can continue with the review. Hi guys, my name is Nick and welcome to Journey to Sound. To jump to a different chapter, just use the links in the description of the video and let's start. Let's glance over package quickly. Pretty much usual for small devices of this type. Package is quite heavy and for a reason. Power supply is quite bulky. We have user manual, warranty card, power brick, 3.5mm adapter and amplifier itself. Topping L30 is a small solid-state amplifier. From a little bit of information I gathered online, it's a sibling from high-end flagship Topping A90. It has similar functionality: off, HPA or pre switch, as well as 3 gain levels. Also, it's advertised as a partnering amp to go with a very well-regarded E30 DAC from Topping, which looks and designs borrows. L30 is positioned in lower end market at around 140 USD, market that I would say is overly saturated by various little amps. It would be interesting to see how does L30 compete. Interesting also to note is that circuit design used in 890 and L30 has some references or similarities to head amp legendary GSX. I won't go into too much detail with comparisons, and I'm not an expert on circuit topology, but this is something that I think carries a lot of weight. Unit in the review is my own, purchased from a local retailer addicted to audio. Overall, I'm not associated with them, but I purchased from them in past and I can recommend them. Let's have a look at the build. It's a fairly small device. It's built quite well. Aluminum housing with front black glassy plastic. It does not look cheap, nor does it feel cheap. Switches are metal and have a good feel to them, quite clicky. They follow logical placement, I would say, from off to headphone amplifier to preamplifier, and gain from -9 to 0 to 9 dB. Knob feel is quite good, has a bit of resistance, and when rotating it has this analog vibe which I like. In my unit it's perfect, but I've read that some people have been complaining on forums about being wobbly and not completely fixed to the housing. Definitely not an issue with my unit. On the back we have RCA inputs and outputs for preamp use. Connectors are gold-plated metal and the knob has aluminum finish as well. As it was purchased locally, it has a Aussie plug. I've been seeing people complaining on forums about EU plug from units that they've been getting from AliExpress, so something to keep in mind. Amp comes in 2 color variants, all black and silver and black. Front plate has the same look in both color variants, glossy black. Information is quite nicely displayed and it's easy to see in which position switches are. Main feature of this amp compared to other competing ones is the use of NFCA modules. It stands for Nested Feedback Composite Amplifier. It utilizes voltage current hybrid feedback architecture and claims quite low, ultra low noise levels for low impedance headphones. Like mentioned before, there are 2 modes of operation: HPA amplifier and pre as preamplifier. In both modes, complete circuitry is used, so even gain switch plays a role for pre-out. I assume that same output is rewired to the back with attenuation. Power output rated is up to 3.5 watts. I'm honestly not sure how exactly this was measured, considering that other reported values were not exactly standardized. For example, reported SNR is impressive 141 dB, but was measured with input that is much higher than what anyone is going to use with it. I can't tell by the specs, but from what I've seen on Audio Science forum, some measurements used 4 volts or even 5 to get to these high numbers. In practice, this amp will be paired with single-ended DACs that usually have around 2 volts output power, so these reported measurements are probably lower. I'm sure the reason for that was to state that it's quite capable a clean amp even when overloaded. But I'm not sure that they actually needed to do that, considering how clean this amp already is at 2 volts. Weakest point of the amp is crosstalk, and that's kind of expected, being single-ended and having a shared ground. For evaluation, I've used multiple scenarios. Basically, DACs that were used were topping D70, SMSL M8. Amps used for comparisons are JDS Labs Atom, Drop THX AAA 789, and Cayenne IHA 6. Headphones used: Sennheiser HD650 or 6XX, Hi-Fi Sundara and Ananda, Mist speakers Aeon Closed, Focal Elex and Elegia, as well as a couple of IEMs. In general, I listen to my music on a desktop PC, and it's usually foobar with optical out into the DAC. Let's talk about the sound and signature. Basically, there is none. It's free from coloration, it's flat as it gets, it's bumpy in a wire, however you like it. Overall, amp is very clean, fast and detailed. It manages to deliver incredible amount of detail even in very complex and dynamic music. Bass is fast, it has low decay and maintains a lot of detail and texture. In comparisons to JDS Atom, L30 sounds cleaner. Previously, I considered Atom to be natural, and especially in the bass, but bass sounds thicker on Atom compared to L30. It's not elevated, which leads me to think that it's not as clean. I don't really hear any distortion from either of them, even on high-level listening. Mids sound clean, dynamic and detailed. I would argue that at these low distortions levels in the amp, distortions that we are able to hear are from headphones themselves. And the highs are again very detailed. Considering the other equipment you use, it might be a bit sharp. For example, matching with ESS Sabre DACs or bright headphones. I personally do not enjoy bright headphones, and as a result, I don't own ones that have that characteristics. Even SMSL M8 DAC that I have is not as sharp as some other ESS DAC, at least the ones that I had chance to hear, topping DX7S and SMSL SU8. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's talk about presentation. This is where I actually had some expectations. L30 being sibling from A90 give me some hope that it might actually be able to break the flat wall presentation. Presentation, like almost all the DACs in this price range tend to have, especially ones based on TI amplification chips. At this point in my hi-fi journey through different amps, I find that wall is too easy to notice. I'm happy to report this is where this little amp breaks the barriers of what we expect from a cheap amp. Presentation is not flat. There is width and there is depth. Music is lively and realistic. It's my impression that lower end gear tends to just not hide details, but also when they are preserved, present them in a way that does not sound realistic or true to the recording. To less trained ears, these things are difficult to notice. I remember noticing myself for the first time when I got Cayenne IHA 6, compared it to the cheaper amps that I had at the time. Combined all together, music played through L30 sounds pretty much true to the source. On some well-recorded tracks, it's easy to tell how narrow or wide the sounds are, how it was mastered and how big the room was. Truly astonishing for what essentially is an entry-level amp. This can be a negative as well. Lesser recordings will sound worse than you can remember them. L30 produces very good instrument and sound separation. When finite details, and I guess time domain, is properly preserved and coherent, it allows for fine skews in the music to be apparent to the listener. sense of wideness and soundstage or lack thereof becomes apparent. With that said, I don't expect that music you listened and know well to suddenly open and sound amazing. But well recorded and produced music definitely will. To test the power output of the amp, I pretty much tried it on all the headphones that I have at the moment. None of the headphones that I had required more than 12 o'clock on high gain. For the test, I didn't have any very sensitive IEMs. The ones that I have are Thin Hi-Fi T2 and T4, and they did not experience any noise that I can hear at least. During listening sessions, I would usually start with a lower end headphone and pretty much climb up as I progress with the listening session. So starting with my favorite, I would say, entry hi-fi headphone, Sennheiser 650 or 6XS, is quite capable of scaling quite well on better amps. And running on L30 was not an exception. I would say it hit the limits of what is possible with Sennheiser headphone. From a transition to upper tier headphones like HiFiMan Sundara or Focal Elex, I managed to get even more detail. As you might expect, resolution increased as well. Going to Ananda and Elegia pretty much confirmed the same story. Aside from the fact that those two are the most detailed, they were powered very well. There was no lack of detail that I've experienced compared to the previous amps that I had, so THX or Cayenne IH6. In direct comparisons to THX 789, it was really difficult to tell the difference. One thing that was different from the beginning was the signal that was fed into the both amps. So from D70, the balanced signal was going into the THX and single-ended was going to L30. So maybe a little bit of channel separation, but overall almost indistinguishable. Cayenne IH6 is a bit more musical, if I can use that word. So it was quite easier to tell the difference, but overall resolution-wise, level of detail and nuances in the music were all preserved on both amps, and they were both quite punchy and fast. Keep in mind that I don't have any higher-end headphones to pair it up with, but these that I have were easily driven very well. Let's talk about downsides. One thing that occurred on a couple of occasions was the delay of signal or loss in signal on left channel. It was occurring when headphones were plugged, gain switch position was changed, or when input signal was interrupted for a brief time. Almost as if circuitry was sensing the input and turning itself first on the right side and then with slight delay on the left side. And after a number of listening sessions, I've discovered that this was happening only after long sessions, like 3 hours or plus, and only on high gain, like above 12 o'clock on the dial. After a pause of 5 minutes, issue have been gone. On touch, amp was quite warm, and it looks to be an overheating issue. Other downside, if you can call it like that, is the lack of features. It has 2 modes of operation, amplifier and preamplifier, and a gain switch. Some other products might have more functionalities, likes of i5 for example. Some other amps that are worth considering. JDS Labs Atom is still quite good entry-level amp for a lower price. At the same price, Sheet Magni 3 Plus and Heresy are good options as well. Similarly priced to L30 is iFi ZenCan, and similarly to Topping, it's a sibling of a flagship iCan Pro. At a bit higher price, Gishelli Elish and Drop THX 789 present great balanced options. In conclusion, by watching other reviews of Topping A90, I can understand why it was hyped that much. Considering that I already owned a number of, I would say, good amps, I didn't jump on a A90 bandwagon. But considering how L30 impressed me in this review, I think my wallet will suffer. To reiterate the statement from the beginning, this amp offers high-end performance at low-end price. It is one of the best amps that I have a chance to hear, and I highly recommend it. To many, this can be the first amp and probably the only amp to have. If you already own a cheap amp and you're happy with it, there's no really need to change. But if you are interested to hear what $140 can buy you in 2020, you might be surprised. But keep in mind that pairing with other equipment you might have also plays a big role. Headphones that are not as resolving will not benefit much. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video and find it informative. And considering this is my first video on YouTube, feedback would be appreciated. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next one.